Hello, I am pleased to be joined today by Adam Matthews, Chief Responsible Investment Officer for the Church of England's Pension Board and also Chair of the Global Investor Commission for Mining 2030 and also valued member of the Mining Indaba Sustainability Committee. Adam, delighted to have you here.
Thank you very much for having me.
Adam, I've heard you mention recently that investors need to rethink that they invest. How do you think that we disrupt traditional investment?
Well, look, the mining sector is enormously important. I think everybody in Indaba is here because they know that, and clearly it supports lots of jobs, it supports lots of infrastructure, and it has a very significant role for many of the countries in which mining is operating. But the real challenge is this is a sector that really requires long-term thinking, long-term patient investment. A lot of the projects, a lot of the mines are open over multiple decades. And the way that the investment industry sort of really interacts with this sector is over much shorter time frames. And I think there's a real tension there. And if we're going to ensure that this sector can perform to the highest and best standards, that it can meet the demand for things like the low carbon transition and just general demand from society for what is produced from mining, we really need to rethink the way that we're investing in it as investors. And pension funds like mine, we're quite removed from the mining sector. And therefore, understanding the realities of what's required and really the complexities and the challenges in the mining sector is distant. And if we're going to change this, we need to engage with a much broader set of investors to get that understanding and then really rethink the kind of timeframes, the kind of expectations we have of the companies we're invested in, the debt we provide, and the kind of return that we expect over what time frame, if we're going to see this sector can really perform and provide what it needs to for society.
Adam, you mentioned that long-term investment. What do you think that investors can be looking at today that will ensure long-term return on investment?
Well, I think when you're a pension fund like I am, we have duties over multiple decades. So we're a pension fund, we're growing, we're going to be here for multiple decades. And you look at the kind of time horizons of mining sector, this is multi-decadal as well. So there's actually an interest and alignment for asset owners like us, who are a significant part of the global sort of investment picture. And yet that sort of where it breaks down is in the sort of connection with the vehicles through which we invest. We're not creating mandates for our fund managers that are enabling them to have longer time frames in terms of the returns that they expect. And so one of the things we want to do through the Global Investor Commission on Mining 2030 is really sort of take a step back, look at that whole demand picture of what the sector's got to do, where it's going to come from, the standards that we're going to need to ensure that are absolutely there across all the kind of key social, environmental, governance standards, but then really rethink the way that we can really incentivize, support, value the sector differently. And I think through that approach, you have an opportunity to really rethink, disrupt perhaps a traditional model that has existed for a very long time and do it differently, because I think we've got to. Otherwise, this sector is going to struggle to meet the demand that society expects of it.
You mentioned a few different things there, and I know ESG is an important requirement for the Church of England Pension Board's investment. And there are many conversations happening at present about ESG standards that are globally accepted. What are your thoughts about this?
Well, I think that quite clearly standards that are good, that are best practice standards, are a good thing. And we need good best practice standards, clearly defined, clearly articulated, practicable. We don't want sort of ridiculously aspirational that just there's no hope of a company attaining them. I think it's important that you have a sense of the vision, the kind of ultimate goal, but you can also recognise that companies are where they are and where they need to get to, and that you have time in which you can then work up to achieving a higher standard. But I think it's key that investors who have often created lots of demand for new disclosures, ESG data points, and there's been a real sort of explosion in that kind of space, particularly in this sector. And I think it's very challenging for a company when you're looking at the kind of waterfront of issues that you've got to be responsive on, that there hasn't been a consolidation on standards. And so I'm particularly supportive of having a clearer alignment of expectations from investors in terms of what it is that we need from companies to be able to understand that they are performing to the best standards, that we have the transparency, the evidence that these are standards not just being applied at the corporate level but at the actual individual mine site, and that we've got systems of transparent audit that can really evidence that they're being implemented. Now, when you're thinking ahead, and that's why I think the Global Investor Commission on Mining 2030 presents an opportunity, if you think ahead to 2030, which isn't too far away, but is just far away enough that I think we can think a bit more ambitiously, that you can think back from there of what is the ideal situation that we want here? What are the standards that we want to see alignment around? What is the expectation that investors can really sort of stand behind, and what's the infrastructure that's needed to demonstrate companies are meeting that? And if we can put that sort of consolidated view in place, I think that can be a really positive contribution to the sector. I know there's efforts underway to consolidate. I'm supportive of the principle of that. I think it's really important investors have a view as to what they need for us, as well as colleagues in the insurance and the banking sector, to align behind, because we've seen what we can do on tailings. We've developed a global industry standard. We've defined what good practice is with industry, with the UN, with multi-stakeholders. And through that, we're starting to see tangible evidence of change.
Thanks, Adam, and thank you all for watching. Look forward to seeing you all at Mining Indaba in Cape Town in February 2024.